welcome to the first episode of RNBR News. It's the greatest reptile news channel ever made, ever in existence. So, sit back and enjoy the show. So on today's topic, I think we'll take a look at some nonsense in the news and maybe go from there. And I think this is a good example of just how bad government is at their job and how they will just pretend like reality doesn't matter. So here we have California rules that bees are a type of fish in order to protect them under the state's Endangered Species Act. So I think this is good for a laugh and sad for a country at the same time, because these are the people that are supposed to be making laws and having a judicial system to rule to make sense of laws and find laws that are idiotic as needing thrown out or rewritten. And here is a case where none of anything you'd want to happen in a judicial system happened. So apparently in 2018 there was some issue with some bees. So there was these four different bee species that were classified as endangered in 2018. Land invertebrates are not explicitly protected under the state's Endangered Species Act. I guess that's CISA or whatever, which protects endangered native species or subspecies of birds, mammals, fish, amphibians, reptiles, or plants. So just amend it. Why would you not just amend the law or amend the statute to cover it? But instead, but CISA's, I think that's how you're supposed to say that, Fish and Game Code, which established a basis on which plants and animals are protected, define fish as a wild fish, mollusk, crustacean, invertebrate, amphibian, or part of spawn. You can see the rest here. But I'm kind of curious as how fish under California state law got such a broad explanation. Like, how is an amphibian a fish? It's like, well, it lives in water and so do fish, so it's a fish. So, I just think this highlights the stupidity of government and the judicial system's willingness to protect the rulemakers versus making sure we have good laws and good rules and good and sensible regulations. So, as you move forward with things like the Competes Act, which I'll get into here in a second, there's no reason to wonder why it's so hard to discuss these issues with government officials, because a judge just ruled that a bee is a fish and an amphibian is a fish, and it just makes no sense. So so that's happened, and it's kind of discouraging on a general level. So, but yeah, if we get into the Competes Act a little bit, the other thing I wanted to show first before talking about that was this: the USARK YouTube channel. Sadly, this channel has it doesn't have that many subscribers. Which is kind of funny in a way, because I have the entire internet busting my balls saying I need to be a USARK supporter, and then they can't take the time to follow them on YouTube, which is sad. But it also highlights another thing that we need to have a real discussion about, and that is the rise of the YouTube herpetoculture superstar and their channels. Now, that's going to be a much longer video and a much bigger topic that I'm not going to get into now, but if you were to ask me what is the most potentially damaging thing to the reptile industry as of right now coming from the reptile industry, I would have to say it's the YouTube herpetoculture superstars. The amount of garbage content they're putting out is probably the most damaging thing coming from the reptile industry right now. And I would say it's even more damaging than the overproduction of animals that we're seeing in terms of hurting us, because when you look at these people and what they're putting in their content, most of them, they are putting out clickbait nonsense. Um, and and they have all these viewers, and then they say, well, follow USARK and support USARK. Well, why don't they support USARK by not doing idiotic stuff for the online community? And when you look at a lot of these people that follow these individuals, they're not really reptile people. They might have a one reptile, or they have none, or they just like watching somebody messing with a croc or a venomous snake, or operating on a reptile. It's hard to say. Or a lot of them also are feeding videos, and I don't want to get into all of that, but their demographic of viewers isn't really the reptile industry for the most part. They have a lot of people watching their show that either have no reptiles or just one or two. So you're talking about the pet store base consumer. So, and they don't, and that level of consumer doesn't give a shit if reptiles, if there's a bunch of Lasiac stuff, because they'll just get whatever little animal that their Petco can get in, and then that's what they'll buy for their kids. So you can't really market USARK to these people in a way that's probably helpful. So maybe stop making the content that is so damaging. That's what I would recommend. But here we got the new USARK YouTube channel, which they should have done this 10 years ago, and there's not a whole lot of content on there, but they do talk about the Lacey Act amendments within the Competes Act, and you can check those out. Now, the Lacey Act stuff in the Competes Act, I looked up what some of the people that look into bills thought about the Competes Act, and they gave it a 96% likelihood of passing into law. And I would agree with that to some extent. Joe Biden has a long history of not accomplishing anything. So even a bill that has a 96% likelihood to become law under the current administration has a good chance that it won't. Now, what you need to understand is the Senate version of that bill, I think it's 1260, was bipartisan, and it did have some support from both sides. Then the House bill is just insane. It's just insane. There's so many amendments. There's so much crap in it. It's unlikely that it can pass with all that garbage in it. And something like Lacey Act amendments in a Competes bill, it doesn't make any sense. So in my opinion, unless our government has totally went insane, the Competes Act is not going to become law with amendments to the Lacey Act in it. Not saying you shouldn't do what USARK is telling you, which is to contact your representatives. I'm just saying it's unlikely. And I would suggest that when you do contact your representatives, there's a couple things you add. I know USARK is providing sample letters and this and that, but there's a couple, but most of the sample letters and most of the complaints that your government officials are getting from the reptile industry is a very subjective, me, personal impact. And I think there might be a better way to go about that. In 2012, when HR 511 hit the House Judiciary Committee, the main issue they were worried about in that committee was over criminalization. And they went into great detail about all these people that have been locked in cages for violating Lacey Act laws they didn't know existed, because it's a very obscure law. Your average person isn't going to know about anything on the Lacey Act. Most people have never heard of it. So overcriminalization, I think, is probably the most important thing you could add when you're writing or calling or emailing your representatives and explaining to them that you're about to do something to a piece of legislation that has no knowing clause or willing clause, which means there's no burden on the state or the federal government to show that this specific individual violated a law knowingly. And they say ignorance is an excuse, but when you have such an obscure law, like the Lacey Act or like a interstate commerce issues for a specific animal, you there are typically, well, sometimes there are knowing and willing clauses added to these statutes that are making laws that you would just have no way of knowing existed unless somebody went out of their way to explain it to you. So you need to let your representatives know that there are a lot of people potentially going to be in a position of committing felonies without knowing it, and there's no protection for these individuals who accidentally break these laws. And because of CITES and this inter country agreement on upholding each other's laws for importation, exportation of animals specifically that they considered endangered, this also becomes a huge issue. Namely, another thing you want to mention is the people that have went to jail for violating a Honduran law on the length of lobster tails. And this is a law that was never officially signed into law in Honduras, yet people in the United States have went to prison for importing lobster tails from there that were half an inch too small. There was, if you look up, there's an article of, I think it says potential 8 years in prison for importing lobster tails in plastic bag, not cardboard box. So because of some law in another country, United States citizens are potentially going to prison for 8 years for bringing in lobster tails in a bag, not a box. So these are the kind of situations that you really need to articulate to your representatives, because it's great that you're saying, well, hey, this is how it's going to negatively impact me. But you also need to explain to them, like, hey, this is how it's going to negatively impact an entire country, because there's so many vague laws. There's so many ridiculous things that need restructured or rewritten within some of these statutes that it's leaving the entire U.S. Population vulnerable to committing a felony with no knowledge of it and no protection of willing or knowing clause. So that's something that you need to address. And a very good specific example would be if the snakes if they get the amendment to regulate interstate commerce. Some of the large constrictors that were added were already illegal to take, and still are illegal to take across state lines because of their endangered status in their own country. Indian python's a good example. Ceylonese python's a good example. So you have, if that happens, if that amendment happens, it will be a double felony to cross a state line with an Indian python. Now, say somebody just recently found out about snake shows. They had a couple snakes. They show up at a snake show, and there happens to be, it's rare, but it can happen. There's Indian pythons there. Somebody has a clutch of Indians now, or Ceylonese or whatever. That chances are that person has no idea of what the legal status is of that animal. And let's say it's an impulse buy. So now that individual has this animal, and say they move out of state. Well, now they've committed a double felony. They violated statute 18 USC 42, and the other statute, it's 16 something. That covers the endangered animals. So so according to our government, an Indian python is both potentially invasive or injurious and endangered. So that's a good point to make to your representatives, like saying, hey, some of these animals can't thrive in their natural habitat. So what sense does it make to have them listed as injurious on the Lacey Act? Because, and what sense does it make it illegal to take an Indian python or any other situation similar from across the state line from North Dakota to South Dakota? Okay, that doesn't make any sense to say, well, you committed a double felony for taking a snake across an imaginary line. Now, one or the other, I'll give you one or the other, but it can't be both. An Indian python can't be so endangered it can't survive in India, but it's so potentially invasive that you shouldn't be able to take it from North Dakota to South Dakota. That is a situation where logic proves you're right. So use situations like that when you're talking to your representatives about these kinds of things. So and that's what I recommend you do. But you should probably go over on YouTube, join this, at least try to keep up to date with what's going on. If you want to give USARK money, that's up to you. I personally don't. If they get together a game plan that I feel makes sense, then I would start contributing. But until then, until I see a rock solid plan, I'm not giving them anything. And I was really looking forward to supporting USARK after Wyatt left, but when I saw how they handled the lawsuit, I couldn't give them money. I explained to USARK, well, I explained to the whole reptile community years ago that if they only focused on the interstate commerce part of their lawsuit, not the arbitrary and capricious listing, which directly relates to what I was just talking about with an Indian python being considered both invasive and injurious, that the animals would stay on the Lacey Act, and eventually the U.S. government would have to try to do something to amend the Lacey Act, because the ruling on interstate commerce was across the board a general ruling. It didn't just deal with our animals. So now, after USARK won the interstate commerce lawsuit, it was official that any invasive plant or animal on the Lacey Act could legally go across state lines unless there was a law prohibiting bringing said animal or plant into that state. So it put USARK winning the interstate commerce lawsuit, which was correct. They should have won, but at the same time, it put us in a really bad position, because now Fish and Wildlife need to be able to regulate the truly invasive and injurious animals listed on there. And here is where, when I was saying earlier, something like a knowing clause or willing clause is important, because you have something like people out boating and they actually pick up a zebra mussel, get stuck to the side of the boat or whatever, something like that. Or there's that mollusk, I forget what the hell it is, gets stuck to the side of their boat. They go across state lines with it. Boom, felony. Felony for not knowing that some of this stuff exists, and not knowing that they even took it across state line. But you could still get popped for a felony for doing that if somebody sees some stupid little animal that's stuck to the side of your boat when that you picked up in another state. So here is what I said in 2015. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I just want to point out that if you want to go and look at this is from 10/9/2015. So I pointed out in this what would happen if USARK focused so heavily on their interstate commerce aspect of their lawsuit and not the arbitrary and capricious listing, which I feel was the only thing that really mattered from a protecting this industry standpoint. It's great that they won on the interstate commerce front, but to just walk away from the lawsuit at that point was a really bad call. So if you go in here and you want to read this, you can go through, you can see what I said. I pointed out that the animals would still be on the Lacey Act, and it was going to force Fish and Wildlife's hand to try and get an amendment to the Lacey Act, and they would go after more power. And we see that today with the whitelist. Now, a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff in that Lacey Act amendment was actually spawned out of the whole COVID. They think it came from bat stuff, which we know is garbage, which is also something you could point out to your representatives. But when people ask me why I don't support USARK, even though I'm telling you to go get on their channel and at least listen to them and pay attention, it's because of this. It's because it's not even about USARK. It's about the industry as a whole refusing to accept the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is, if you win on the interstate commerce front but don't get the snakes removed, they stay on the Lacey Act, and now everything on the Lacey Act can legally go across the state line. And what does that do? That forces the hand of Fish and Wildlife to try and gain more authority to be able to control some of this stuff. That's just common sense. Well, if you read through this, this is just a bunch of people, mostly just a bunch of people bitching at me, telling me I'm a conspiracy theorist and I'm this or I'm that. But I was right. I was 100% right. But here we are today, all these years later, and it's a giant fucking mess. And it's going to continue to be a giant fucking mess until the industry takes a step back and says, okay, let's reevaluate how we're going to solve these problems. Let's reevaluate our methods of going after these issues when they arise. Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to be kind of proactive, not reactive. When you look at something like USARK Florida, they're posting a lot of stuff. They're posting a lot of information, a lot of very proactive stuff. They're constantly posting, constantly on here, every day. Now, you go over to USARK's, and it's not, it's more like, it's, you got this, some frogs, and this is cool. I mean, this is, viable information, good information. USARK Florida's Facebook page is doing significantly better and putting out more informative information than the USARK page. I mean, it just is. It's not a criticism. I mean, it kind of is, but it's just, look at it. It's a fact. I think USARK needs some sort of online team to really get information out there. So, but that's for all the USARK members to push on them. USARK's only going to be as good as its members, and when you have only a handful of people following them on YouTube, which is the best place to get out information, it's not looking good. So, but that's what I recommend for anybody who's contacting their representatives. Let them know about issues like overcriminalization. Let them know the issues about how some animals, if they do get control of interstate commerce, will be a double felony for crossing the state line, for being both potentially invasive and endangered, which makes no sense. Let them know, because these are broad issues that negatively impact an entire country. So try not to come at this only from a subjective, well, I'm mad because you want to take away my snakes, or you want to do this. No, explain to them why it's a bad idea on a general level, not why you're pissed off, so, because you just seem like a jealous, selfish asshole. And that's the thing we got to remember. Like, when you see all this stuff going on in Florida, you got a massive amount of invasive reptiles down there. Massive amount. And whether we like to admit it or not, most of them, if not all of them, are there because of our industry. So, we're walking in with this fuck you attitude to Florida Fish and Wildlife all the time, saying, "Oh, this is going to hurt my business. This is going to do this." Well, why doesn't the industry try walking into Fish and Wildlife with a big check of like $50,000 and say, "Well, here, we raised this money to try and help combat some of these issues, and what can we do to ensure that our rights are protected, and we're keeping these animals responsibly, and we're doing something to help alleviate and clean up the problem that we helped create." You don't see that. We've seen zero responsibility. We don't see that. We see zero responsibility taken for the reptile industry for a lot of these issues. And all they do is, well, it's bad for business. It's bad for business. And the other side of it is arguing from a position of environmental protection and safety. So how do you think that makes the reptile industry look, when our only argument ever to invasive stuff is, well, if you do that, it's going to cost me money? We look like assholes. So that whole mindset needs to change. It needs to be looked at in a much different way. So that's just something to think about. But you have to take a step back and really look at this and figure out the best steps you can take to correct these issues. And taking zero responsibility and just complaining that it might cost you money, well, what do you get? There's so much pushback on Florida Fish and Wildlife. But what do they keep doing? They keep coming out with stricter and stricter and stricter regulations. And they're just going to keep going because all they're doing is getting pushback from the reptile industry for the most part. And they have all these problems and it's all over the news. So they got to do something. And what does government do? They make laws. Why do they make laws? Because that's how they make money. You know, we got laws and taxes. That's how they suck money out of people. So that's kind of what is happening. And until the industry is willing to at least take an honest look at itself and say, okay, we probably did create most of these issues in Florida with these stupid iguanas everywhere and all this stuff. What can we do to try to alleviate some of these issues and at the same time work with Fish and Wildlife and keep our businesses? That's it. That's your only options at this point. There's no other options at this point. So before we get into the next segment, it's time for a message from our sponsors. And our sponsors are me. I pay for all of this shit, all of this equipment. I take the time to make videos and put out content. And I spent about 20 years putting out free information on retics. Now you have to pay for it. It's $1 at my Patreon. Go check that out. And, this stuff is really expensive. So, give me money. Go buy my shit. I need money. I love it. I love your money. So give it to me. So, and that concludes the message from our sponsors. I think next up we're going to talk about some issues in the retic community, which are ever present and ever growing. And I was watching the world's greatest retic podcast recently. It's called the Retic Exchange with two very knowledgeable individuals, James and Chip. And I've noticed in some of their videos, they're talking about the need for calling out breeders for doing things that are less than honest. And if you want to check out their content, I'll give you a little sneak preview. It's riveting shit.
I'm talking about fucking Rodney. I don't care. I'll say his fucking name because I asked him to come on here.
Yeah,
come on here. Let's talk about it.
And he won't.
And he won't. So whatever. And he can make all the videos that he wants and everything. But making his fucking videos, talking shit, saying that Phil, saying all the shit that he says.
Well, why shouldn't we be listening to these two individuals saying that maybe breeders need called out? I mean, who better to lecture the retic community than these two? I mean, when it comes to breeding, making sure we have sustainable bloodlines, when it comes to pushing the retic industry forward and creating groundbreaking stuff, I mean, you name it, these two haven't done it. So who else better than these two than to tell everybody in the retic industry what they need to do? So I had that in mind as I was looking through the train wreck dumpster fire that is the reticulated python section on Morph Market, and I came across something. And maybe you've seen my recent meme concerning the anthrax gene. Well, I noticed here in Nerd's ad that they claim anthrax is from Solaire. And I thought to myself, what would the two greatest retic keepers, James and Chip, do if they saw this? Because they're saying you should call people out on it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what James and Chip said I should do, which is call out breeders. So here we go. It's unfortunate that somebody with as big of a name as Kevin would do something like claim anthrax is from Solaire. And first and foremost, you need to understand why anybody would do that. There's only two reasons. One, you're lying and you're trying to make a sell, or two, you're totally clueless. So that puts Nerd in one of two camps: intentionally misleading and lying, or totally clueless. So I'm kind of hoping they're totally clueless, because that would be the funnier of the two options, because Kevin's supposed to be this world-renowned expert on reticulated pythons, and he's helping USARK about, that would be the funny thing. Unfortunately, I think the most likely thing is they're just lying to sell snakes. So, but why is this an obvious lie? Well, here I'm going to show you the most recent anthrax found. This is the first yellowhead anthrax I know of. This was found in Riau region of Sumatra. Okay. And this is actually a pretty neat animal because it's got a yellow head, and never seen a anthrax with a yellow head. So in the last 20 years, there's been close to 20 anthraxes found. Every single one of them has been found on Sumatra. And here's some pictures from my website. If you go to my website, you can go to the locality archives and you can look up a lot of different. There's a couple hundred pics of different types of retics, different localities, and there's quite a few wild caught anthraxes in there, all of which have been documented from Sumatra. I just think the audacity that Nerd has to just blatantly lie to the public about the origin of their anthrax is pretty sad. It's pretty sad. And in this same post, you can see where they claim that OGS is Jampia, where they claim OGS is Jampia and Golden Child is from Solaire as well. So now all their stuff's dwarf. So why is that? Why is that happening? Like, they've been claiming OGS is Jamp for a while, and GC is from Solaire for a while, and I mean that's all been debunked a million times. Just by the fact that when you breed those animals, they have none of the offspring have any characteristics of those localities, especially when you're dealing with Saputrii, the Solaire. It has so much red pigment that the influence from a Saputrii to whatever breeding is so noticeable, it's just undeniable. So, and now you're going to claim anthrax, an animal that typically has a silver head and doesn't have any red on it whatsoever, is Malaopython reticulatus Saputrii. That's just absurd. And it's even more absurd when there's almost 20 documented cases of them all coming from Sumatra. So, I just, I think it's sad that so many breeders and retics are just willing to lie and not try to make or improve what they're breeding. See, right now in the retic market, if you don't know about it, dwarfs and super dwarfs are what's selling. Mainland stuff is not selling, and it's losing value every day. So all of a sudden, everything Nerd has is now a dwarf retic. And if you look through a little bit more on Morph Market and the retics, you'll see that Prehistoric Pet has almost a blanket label on all their stuff as 43% dwarf with no explanation of anything. So it's making it's a very sad day for retics, because retics had the market basically had died, and it came back to life, because we're able to use some smaller localities to make a much more manageable animal for consumers. And instead of these larger breeders investing in these smaller localities, they're just claiming their stuff is smaller localities. And I think James and Chip are right that people need called out. And they had an opportunity to ask Kevin these questions when he was on his channel, but they didn't. They did let him bitch about me for about 10 minutes, which I'll show you some clips of that, which is hilarious. But it,
what could give you heartburn is the mindset of people like the Rodney Boweliches. People that don't tell the truth. They have conspiracy theories. They take something, and all their whole argument, the whole time they argue, is to take something and twist it and then leave something out, and they're piecemealing this whole thing, and they twist something into their contorted idea, and then they offer that as the whole thing. And it's disgusting. It's literally disgusting. And this is what happens to us. And this is how these laws are occurring. But we literally have people on the inside. Rodney Bowelich he was allowed on Retic Nation lying and misinforming people and shit talking USARK. Let's be very clear. I once had a reasonable back and forth with Rodney Bolich, and I tried to find the good in Rodney. He's not a dumb guy, but he constantly was criticizing USARK way back from the very shitty and destructive times, even of Andrew Wyatt.
But, I mean, at what point do we say enough is enough? And I think the reptile industry hasn't kind of caught up to the digital age. It's not 1987 anymore. Okay, you can't just fuck people over and no one's going to find out about it. All right? You can't do that anymore. It's the internet. Everybody's talking, everybody finds out about it. You look at this situation with Bob and the boas with IBD. I think 2 tested positive. I know 1 did for sure. And look at how he responded to it, which was he kind of attacked that girl and blamed it on her and said it was fine. Well, she posted videos of the animals. The animal was a mess. You don't send a snake out like that. And it quickly went downhill, and it immediately tested for IBD, putting her entire collection at risk. There were so many apologists, basically, for Bob online, just being like, well, it's okay, it's Bob. He's done so much. Well, that's fine. And and I don't even think you should bust people's balls for too hard about something like IBD, because disease happens. It's just a part of how life works. But how you handle it when it does happen is really important. And calling somebody a liar, blaming them, saying it was their husbandry, when you have documentation, paperwork right there saying in the necropsy IBD. So, and I see that same shit with these other big names. You got Nerd just making stuff up. Now all their stuff stores. I don't want my stuff bred to their stuff. I don't want somebody grabbing a ternate and breeding it to that animal. It's some super tiger, whatever, that they claim is basically all Solaire and Jamp. I don't want my shit bred to their stuff, because all that does is ruin my stuff. And it's just so. I think that was that'll be my first call out on the news channel. Is Nerd lying about anthrax being from Solaire? And well, what can I tell you? I'm only listening to James and Chip. And here's the thing. If you want to look into this further, you think I'm just being a dick or whatever, do your own research. And a great person to ask about this is none other than Garrett Hartle. Rumor has it he's hard to get a hold of these days on the phone, but there is one time where you can get a hold of him, and that is his live streams, super chats. So if you have any questions regarding the origin of anthrax, I think a good person to ask would be Garrett on his live stream. I know it costs money, but if you really would like to hear his opinion and you are financially strapped and you can't afford the live chat, let me know. I will gladly PayPal you the money so you can ask him live where he thinks anthrax came from. I'll happily pay for it. So that was the call out section of the show, and let's move forward. But another message from our sponsors, which is me again. I'm going to be selling paper soon, shipping boxes, and I'm actually working on cork bark, they're half tubes. They're basically hide. So I'm hopefully going to have that up for sale real soon on the website, so you can go check that out. Once again, just give me your money, and I love money, and I need a bunch of it. So thank you for your support. So the famed Snake Road closes in Illinois for reptile and amphibian crossings. I've known about this for a while. Yeah, I just thought this was an interesting thing. This officially March 14th, it closed down. So I bit late to the party talking about this. But yeah, this has been going on for years. I used to talk to the guy that got this to happen. There was some shit going on in Illinois at the time in USARK. I think this was via Wyatt was involved, and I remember talking to him. He was telling me about all this stuff that they were able to do to get this one specific road closed down because of how many animals were getting killed on it. So that's interesting. That's a neat thing that they were able to do, and this has been going on for years. So this is saved the lives of literally thousands and thousands of native reptiles and amphibians in Illinois. It'd be nice to see more states taking an interest in protecting their animals, not just all their animals, in a legitimate fashion instead of just making laws. Doing something like this that actually has a real world effect. So that's pretty much it for this first episode of Reptile News by me, the greatest reptile news channel ever invented, ever in existence. It's amazing, and you're welcome. And this was just real quick. I actually had some time to kill, so I was like, well, I talked about doing this like a week or two ago, and I just haven't had time. So I had an hour or so to kill here in the morning, so I figured I'd put out this first test episode, basically, just to see what people think. Just try to elaborate a little bit on some of the issues going on. I will have another episode out within a week, and it's going to be a little more polished. I'll have a lot more actual reptile news to talk about. I just haven't had time to sit down and do the research and look at a lot of the newer reptile scientific papers and some discoveries and things that are being made in the scientific community, which I think doesn't get highlighted very much in the reptile industry because we can't make any money off of it. But it is important, and I think there's at least a handful of people that actually want to hear about real science relating to reptiles, and I think it's just a little bit more of a positive type information to put out there, which is a little bit different than what we typically get from pretty much everybody on YouTube dealing with reptiles. But the next episode, I'll also do a little piece on the rise of the YouTube herpetoculture superstars. I'm going to show some of their content, some of their behavior, and basically I'm going to show this, and then we're going to ask the question, one is, why are they doing this? Two, is it worth it monetarily speaking when you take into consideration the potential damage it's doing overall to the reptile industries, and is people agitating large constrictors to strike at them while they're trying to pull eggs? Is that really helping? Is it, is any of this really helping? And, you need to understand something about the YouTube scene. If you wonder why you're seeing creators talk so much about other creators and doing this or that, and it's all clickbait, and the reason they do this is because if you look up how to make money on YouTube, that what you're seeing all these YouTube reptile people doing is they're just following the program that every YouTube video on how to make money on YouTube tells you what to do, and that is doing cameos on other people's pages, doing clickbaity thumbnails, doing clickbait type title headings, doing, just doing anything along the lines that would essentially be entertaining. And because of that, you gain an audience that's not really looking to get informed about anything. They're looking to be entertained. Now, there are some exceptions to this. You got Snake Discovery that isn't too clickbaity, and they're just kind of showing you some animals. They put out quality information mostly. And then you got somebody like Clint's Reptiles, which he seems pretty decent across the board, with the exception of the one episode he did telling everybody Superdorf retics make fur snakes, which they probably don't. And I that was the one time that I saw him do something. I was like, wow, that's irresponsible. But for the most part, his stuff is pretty quality as far as content goes. But these same people that are saying support US Arc are peddling garbage content to consumers that couldn't care less if we lose the ability to keep these animals. So maybe US Arc needs to address that at some point in time and say, well, is the money these people are bringing in really worth the damage they're doing long term, and the money US Arc's going to have to spend on lawsuits and attorneys and legal fees? It's not. You don't even need to do that math. It's not. So, if a YouTube channel isn't putting out quality information, factual information, and it's just clickbait, then it's just damaging. That's all it is damaging. It's not doing anything good. So, if and YouTube is kind of an interesting thing because it's allowed everybody to kind of like just become their own movie star, and to the detriment of society for sure. So that'll be next week's episode, and maybe I'll be able to sit down and find some good articles on recent discoveries, recent scientific papers, and post some links to that. So if you're actually interested in learning something versus watching a crackhead cut into the side of a snake, that might be some good content for you. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to be making another one very soon. And don't forget, give me lots of money so I can keep doing this. No, I'm just kidding. I'll keep doing this whether or not I make any money, or even if no one even has to watch it, I'll still do it because I like it.